Who are you? Beneath the expectations, the labels, and the societal conditioning, what does it truly mean to become you? I'm John Fleming, the founder and lead practitioner of Becoming You. I created Becoming You out of a desire to share my own experience of becoming myself and to support others who are curious about who they are. From a young age, I have been driven by a desire to figure out who I am, why I'm here, and how I can belong while being myself. This is Becoming You, the podcast. Conversations about uncovering, embracing, and being your true self. A place where I dive deep into what it means and what is required to live life as your most authentic self. Through real, honest, and grounded conversations with professionals and people who are walking the path. If you're curious about identity, authenticity, and personal freedom, your own or others, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Paige, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's great to have you here. Yeah, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Paige. I'm 27 and I'm a trans intersex woman living in Dublin.
Nice. It's so good to have you here and to talk about gender identity generally and some of your story. So thank you so much for coming on. As you know, we always start the episode with a question from the last guest. And Claire's question for the next guest was, what role is race playing in your life?
I work with all different races, and I think when it comes to the job that I play in healthcare, I think half of the things that are currently happening in the healthcare in a positive aspect wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for different races and different ethnicities and different diversities. I think to question race to people, the way people question race, I think is quite ridiculous.
Yeah, and Ireland's going through a real tension point around that at the moment. Like, the rise of the far right generally has really targeted most intersectional minorities. So like, we see that at the moment with the trans community. There's been a big agenda against the trans community.
To be honest, when it comes to the trans community, I hear people say sometimes that like we've become quite forward in the last 5 years when it comes to inclusion and acceptance of trans people. But I genuinely don't agree with that. I really, really think that in terms of inclusivity and general inclusion, I think that it's gotten worse in years.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think that there's many political situations at the moment as well that influence that. Like, people have said to me, oh, it feels like things like homophobia and transphobia have got worse recently. And my response to that always is, it hasn't gotten worse. It's just being more vocal. People are being more brazen online keyboard warriors. But it's like those people were always sitting there thinking that, but they didn't have the courage to say it out loud, and now they do.
But I think as well, like, the question about people turn around to me, and a lot of people I know would say, oh, like, but trans has become more common over the last couple of years and stuff, where we've always been there. The same with people that have autism or people that suffer with any like neurodivergency or any type of gender identity question. People are saying that it's become more frequent and more common, but it's always been there. I think we've just become a little bit more vocal about what we deserve as people.
100%. Yeah, I always say that it's people are just actually starting to speak up more and ask for their needs to be met. And maybe the numbers of diagnosis have gone up, but just because the numbers of diagnosis have gone up does not mean that those people didn't exist 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's just they weren't seeking assessment. So, with that in mind, and obviously we're here to talk about gender identity broadly and some of your own experience as well. Maybe just like quite a broad question to begin with, and you can take us wherever you'd like to start. But I'm really curious to hear about your experience of becoming yourself in your life. Wondering where you'd like to begin with that.
Yeah. So I lived the first 12 years of my life as male. I was brought up typically the way a boy would. The mechanic, I learned how to change brake pads and air filters, all of it, that kind of thing. I was raised quite typically male and went to an all boys school. And I came out as gay when I was about 12. and I expected a huge weight to be lifted off my shoulders, and that kind of wasn't the case. I always felt that I was quite different, but I couldn't really understand why. And I was about 14 and I became quite unwell. I was experiencing heartburn and stuff like that, just small symptoms. And on top of that, I wasn't developing quite as much as my classmates were. So it would have been in about second year at the time. My voice hadn't changed. I didn't develop an Adam's apple, no body hair. I was quite effeminate and I continued to become quite sick. And through blood testing, my estrogen was quite high, which spiked cause for investigation. And I was diagnosed when I was 15 as intersex. So I have what's called a disorder of sexual development or intersex condition. So it's a chromosomal defect, but it wasn't present at birth. So I was diagnosed as intersex at that time. And I began my social transition at 15. I left the all-boys school, moved to a mixed school. And at that time in Ireland, it was illegal for anybody under the age of 18 to take cross-sex hormones. This would have been about 12, 13 years ago. It would have been illegal for me to start testosterone blocker, let alone begin hormone replacement therapy. So I remember I met a bodybuilder on Grindr, and he was selling me injectable estrogen, and I was taking it thinking it was working. Turns out it didn't. Became quite unwell from that, but then there was the constant battle then in turn with the HSE for being referred to an endocrinologist and to kind of start the ball rolling with my medical transition. From the moment I got a diagnosis, I had always known in some capacity that I wasn't male, but I think the lack of education with my surrounding and the lack of education, I think, in a lot of medical professionals at the time, I think there was no outlet for me to actually explore that and to have my needs met from a medical capacity. So I think a lot of the time I just felt like I was pushing myself down and trying to conform as best I could to try and fit in. And from the moment I kind of was given an answer to the question, what's wrong with me, so to speak, I feel like it completely just bloomed into something so beautiful. And honestly, my whole transition, like I'm transitioning 12 years now, and I finally had gender reassignment surgery about 14 months ago over in Germany and fully recovered. And it's actually quite bizarre to sit here now on a podcast platform and actually speak to you and even look at my reflection in a webcam and feel like the identity I was always meant to be. It's quite nostalgic. It really does bring me back to important times throughout my transition where I genuinely thought that I wasn't going to be sitting here, you know? And I'm very, very grateful for the people that I've met along my journey and people that feel similar ways. And I worked in the George for years, and meeting such a diverse group of family that really, really helped me through times when it was quite tough. But I feel like all of my hard work and all of my effort have paid off, and I am genuinely the happiest I think I've ever been in my entire life, to be honest.
Which is just a delight to witness. I've been following you on Instagram for a few years. I can't remember exactly when I started following you, and I remember you posting after your surgery last year in Germany, and I was very moved by how moved you were at the relief that was happening for you. Like, it's kind of hard to explain, but my experience was almost like sharing in that celebration with you. Like, I didn't know you at all, but I could tell from how you were expressing yourself that how much this meant to you.
I think the reason I documented it as much as I did was I kind of wanted to let people know that weren't necessarily going through a gender transition, kind of how important it was. I think for a long time, being trans to me is not like, it's not an end goal for some people. Some people are adequately happy with hormone replacement therapy or just adequately happy with identifying and stuff like that. But I think for me, the main cause of dysphoria and the main cause for sheer fear in myself was what I had in between my legs, and the feeling of waking up after surgery and the thing that I didn't associate with for most of my life not being there anymore. What I was disgusted by most was gone, and the feeling of relief. I genuinely feel like I'm living my life now for the first time. I've never lived my life, and I genuinely feel like I've met myself properly for the first time, and learning more about myself and just really having a life that I never thought I would have is such an eye-opening thing. And I really wanted to document that for people that didn't quite understand or grasp the concept.
Paige, we just go back for a second to the intersex piece. I know what intersex is because I've worked in that area in trans healthcare, so I have an understanding. I remember when I came across the term the first time, though, it was like total news to me, because I do feel like one of the things around gender identity is that there's a lack of information and understanding in the general public. People are not well educated about gender identity, because intersex itself is even a very broad area, right? So you talked about a chromosomal aspect, and then there can be variations even in how people are intersex, and you said it wasn't present at birth for you. If you were to give more information about what being intersex means, how would you break it down for people?
I think when it came to developing secondary sexual characteristics, so when it came to puberty, my body hadn't developed in the way that I was assigned at birth. So typically male, quite androgynous, and my body never kickstarted into the development of male secondary sexual characteristics. So it was more or less the case of, instead of hitting male puberty the way I was supposed to, I began to hit female puberty, and I developed slight breast growth when I was 15, which was put down to a condition called gynecomastia, which a lot of males can develop. And to be honest, it was mammary tissue, it was breast tissue that I was growing at the time. Just with regards to the secondary sexual characteristics that I had developed, and like what I had at the time in between my legs never worked, and this just happened to happen from a puberty perspective. But you are right there, it is a spectrum. Intersex people can be born in such a broad range, you know. It's just mine happened to be from a genetic standpoint chromosomal, and I'm assigned male at birth, and then when puberty came around I developed quite the opposite.
Then when you begin to come to this realization about what's happening, and your family are obviously involved in this because you went to the GP and you had tests done, what was it like for you as a family to deal with this? Because, again, back to my point of people not being well educated, did your family know what intersex was, and how did they receive the information?
No, none of us had any idea. But I suppose I am really, really, really lucky with my family. Like, my mother, she went to all my hormone appointments with me. When I started my transition, she flew over to Germany and spent 3 weeks with me. You know, like, my mum is amazing. My dad, on the other hand, I haven't spoken to my dad since I've transitioned. But I think when it all came to light, I think everyone didn't understand. But my mum had always said I wasn't camp, I was very feminine. So, like, we laugh about that now, because my mum kind of is like, I always knew, you know, that kind of way. But we really didn't know, and we were catapulted into this new territory, and it was such a difficult navigation. Like, I was given the option at the time for testosterone replacement therapy if I wanted to continue on in my assigned gender and continue to live as male. And from the moment that diagnosis was given, that was the furthest from what I'd wanted. It was like something had clicked in my head, and it was like, this is who I am. And there was absolutely no doubt in my mind from that day, you know, being 15 and now 12 years on, it was a no-brainer.
Each time I notice you talk about it, you have this smile that kind of just shows like how comfortable you are within yourself. It's like this was always who you were.
It really, really was. And like, I find I'm so much more calm in myself. I used to look for validation as a woman. I used to look for people to validate me as a woman, and I used to look for that in other people. I used to seek it from other people. And I think since I've become gender affirmed, nobody can give me the validation that I can't give myself. And I find being empowered by yourself and being affirmed by yourself and not needing or seeking validation from anyone. I wake up every morning since my surgery, and like, I kind of sit on the end of the bed and I'm like, oh my God, this is what life was meant to be like for me. And it's just, even like 13, 14 months down the line, being post-op, it's still something that I wake up and have to it's a pinch me moment. Really. Yeah,
that makes so much sense. So it's been about 12 years from figuring out to completing surgery. what was life like in those 12 years? Because you've got to this place now, which like I can see you're glowing, you're really comfortable, you feel really affirmed, and it's beautiful. Those 12 years must have been challenging at times.
Absolutely. I think where I come from, the area I come from, it would be considered quite rough. And I think it's a very community-based area that I was from, but I think I was the only person from my area that had come out as trans, intersex, and had started a transition. And I think I did get an awful lot of hate, especially from men. And I think men were attracted to me through my transition and didn't know what to do with that attraction. And the only common denominator, I think, in their mind was to lash out in an aggression sort of way, because it made them feel, well, does that make me gay? Or like they fumbled with their own attraction to me. And I did have a hard time. I really did for a couple of years. And then I started working in the George. And I think from the moment I had started there, I found a place that I didn't have to explain myself, and I didn't have to worry about judgment. And I could go there and just walk through the door, and I genuinely didn't have to look over my shoulder even. You know, I think when it comes to that aspect of my transition, I didn't really have it difficult towards the end. And I think being able to stand up for yourself and pose this question to people, like I've had a lot of guys throughout the years from my area that I've actually sat with and picked it apart with them. Now, some people, you could talk to them until the cows come home and try and change their opinion, but nobody is going to change a person's opinion if they do not want to change it themselves. So
yes,
you understand sometimes when you're fighting a losing battle with people, but honestly, the majority of the time, all people really need is for you to answer some questions, not invasive questions, but to educate them a little bit, because it's not a topic that's openly talked about. And I find a lot of trans people shy away from topics about being trans to cis people for the sheer fact that they don't want to come across or face ridicule. But how do you expect anybody to treat you the way you want to be treated if you don't actually explain it? That might be a little bit controversial. I do have a few trans friends that would disagree with me on that, but I think in order to change the narrative, you have to become the narrative, I think.
I mean, I can't help but nod along because I share some of your perspective. As a cis person, I might reserve sharing an opinion like that because I feel like it's not my place, because I have my own privilege about being cis. But I definitely feel it as an autistic person and as a person with ADHD and gay. A bit like you, I've sat down with people and deconstructed some of their views with them. And I've always found that a really helpful process. And I think that for younger people coming up, I also feel sometimes like a level of responsibility to be like visible and out there in the world and kind of like taking my place so that younger people don't have to face some of the things that we've faced.
But as well, I think you are absolutely spot on with what you said about having that responsibility and that onus on you. I find as well, I try to put myself into the spotlight being a trans woman a lot, because I think when it really boiled down to it, being out there in the open would help somebody that was younger and up and coming. But then you kind of have to know when to be that advocate and when not to be, because at the same time, you've also, as an LGBTQ plus person, gone through all of this yourself. So you kind of need to give yourself some credit and take your own space as well. I think if you push yourself into an advocacy role, you can kind of forget about yourself as well in the background of it. That's
true. And we do see that happen to some people where it becomes their whole identity and then they get burnt out from it. So I think you're dead right. Like, it's really important to have balance with that sort of thing. So there's like a time and a place. Paige, I wanted to come back to something else that you mentioned, because you mentioned the word dysphoria. Again, I know what that is. I think the general public generally don't understand what dysphoria is. And I wondered if you might break that down a little bit. And would you be willing to talk about some of your experience of having dysphoria and what that was like?
Absolutely. I think everyone in turn experiences a little bit of like body dysmorphia, or I think that's a kind of a good place to start it from. I think, but when it comes to gender dysphoria, personally, the meaning of gender dysphoria is not feeling aligned in your current gender. And there was a complete misalignment with myself, but it was more physically. I always knew mentally that I was a woman, but I think from a physical standpoint, I was disgusted by my body, really. I think And every day that I developed as male, or every day that I wasn't taking hormone replacement therapy, made me quite distraught. And it got to a stage just pre-surgery, like I would have a shower and like I couldn't look at myself from the waist down. I was quite triggered and it was so dysphoric about my genitalia, and it was starting to become really, really concerning for me. It overcame me, and it made me extremely depressed, I think. And like I self-harmed. I was a major self-harmer for a long period of my life. And it was mainly due to gender dysphoria. It was really my disgust in my physical body. I think that was my only outlet at the time. And looking back, gender dysphoria can be lethal.
If these episodes have been sparking curiosity in you about your own identity, then I've got just the thing to support your exploration. I'll be facilitating an Uncover You online workshop on Zoom very soon. This will be a space to gently explore uncovering who you authentically are. This workshop is for anyone ready to start or continue their becoming journey in a grounded, reflective and supportive group space. Find the link in the show notes to book your space now. I know that to be true too, not because of my own experience, but because of the people I've sat with where we've talked about the experience that you've had and the sort of the triggering, the overwhelm, the intensity of it can be really high. Something that I don't always fully understand or appreciate, I think, as a cis person, but I try to make parallels.
Yeah, but that's the only thing that can be drawn. And it is, even though it's not the exact same experience, I think by creating a parallel and trying to understand it from a parallel point of view, that is the same, but just different.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the body dysmorphia one is a useful parallel, because I agree with you that a lot of people will have at some point probably had an experience where their own body triggers them, or they're disgusted with it, or they don't like it, or they don't want to look at it. And that helped me build empathy with trans people about what it must be like, even though I don't have that experience myself. And, you know, when I first started working with the trans community, you know, parents would say things to me like, oh, how are you going to sort this out? You know, like, I'm the therapist or the counsellor. Parents bring their young people to me because they're anxious or depressed. And the idea is we do X amount of sessions and the young person gets, they get better. You know, we talk it out. And I remember at a certain point, you know, because I was quite green and naive when I first started working with trans people, because I didn't, to be honest, hands up, I didn't fully understand it. It was not something covered in my training. I remember saying to a parent at one point, there is no fixing this. This is not something that can be fixed. I was like, I can talk to your young person about this as much as they want to talk about it, and I will continue to do that if it's helpful. But I was like, your young person is in the reality of this won't be fixed until they have transitioned. That's the reality they're living with. Like, there's no talking it out or trying to bind or pad or whatever. It's like, actually what they're telling me is until they have medical intervention, this is just not going to go away. And I think that's really difficult for families because they don't understand. Again, there's a lack of education.
They really don't. And I think a lot of young people, they understand their needs and their wants so much. It can be very aggravating to be faced with barriers consistently. And I know that, like, parents do mean well sometimes in certain situations, but I think if your child is consistently saying to you that something is not right and they don't feel right, I think you're protecting them less by placing a barrier in front of that. And I think, like, I would class myself here as a great example, because, like, I was 12 when I came out as gay, 14, 15 when I started my transition, and my mother didn't know anything about it, but she never placed a barrier in my way. She allowed me to be myself to the best of her ability, and she helped me get there. And I have everything to thank her for that. I really do.
Yes.
You know, she has molded me into the person that I am today, and I would be forever grateful. I could never repay my mother back for the acceptance and allowing me to just live.
Which is such a beautiful thing. Like, even as you say that, I'm actually very moved because we don't always get that in life. And to have your mum do that for you is such a gift.
Very
It's not to say that she shouldn't have done it, but like it is such a gift. What was it like for you then as you went through school and you started engaging with services to navigate all that? Because that's quite a lot for a young person to manage all of these things.
I think as an intersex person, from a therapy point of view, at the time, I was faced with psychologists and clinical psychiatrists and people that had just spoken to intersex people. They weren't gender orientated, or like they weren't well versed in intersex people. And as you spoke to them and kind of relayed your experience and how you were feeling, their responses were almost clinical and textbook based. And that kind of closed me off an awful lot, because I felt like there was no point in me trying to level with somebody that was never going to understand me. And I think I developed a hatred then, because I was like, they're not going to understand me, but sure, who is? Like, you know, like being intersex is quite a rare thing. So you're very unlikely to meet a therapist that has the exact same experience as you. So I needed to kind of push that aside. But I think with engaging with services as I got older, I never really did, because I never fully felt like I was the same as them. And that was a very wrong way of thinking. I think if I had have engaged in therapy services, a lot of bad things probably wouldn't have happened to me through my transition if I had have engaged in mental health advocacy or in any type of service. That's one thing that I would change. I would engage a little bit more. But going through that emotional turmoil, I think there's nobody's going to be able to tell you what to do. And I think you think that your opinion is correct at the time.
How was it with your peers? Was it total isolation and alienation, or did you have a group of people that kind of saw you through those 12 years?
So from school aspects, I skipped fourth year and went straight into fifth year into a mixed school. And my first day, I was welcomed to open arms, and half, if not more, of the class that I had in fifth and sixth year are still my friends to this day. Like we would meet up quite regular. From a peer standpoint outside of school, I still have a lot of friends that I had when I was young. But coming from an all-boys school, I think a lot of friends that I was in primary school with and going in secondary school didn't accept it whatsoever. I had two really, really close friends in primary and first and third year. And they knew I was transitioning, bar one. And I followed him on Instagram there, I'd say about 3 years ago. And he was like, hey, do I know you? And I was like, no. Well, you did know me. And he obviously realised then who I was. But he was a little bit kind of freaked out by that. And then it was about a year later, I was at a gig in the Olympia. And I was walking to the bathroom and he was standing in the queue at the bar. And he looked at me and I looked at him and he just gave me a big hug. And he was like, look, he gave me a hard time at the beginning when I first came out of gay in school when we were friends. And he was like, look, I just want to say I'm so sorry for how he treated you. Like, look, we didn't know. And like, we kind of made amends and we talk now. But I think he had a lot of guilt and a lot of remorse by how he treated me and by his non-understanding kind of shying away from me. So I think it can be quite isolating throughout your transition. But when you really think about it, your peers or your happiness, as sad as it is, I think you will meet your circle, you will meet your group, and you will meet the people that accept you. I think you shouldn't settle for people that don't accept you.
I experience you as so crystal clear. I don't know if anyone's ever given you this feedback before, but you were like, the clarity when you speak is just razor sharp. It's like there's no ambiguity. And you're also really mature, because some of the things that you've gone through are really difficult.
I think the majority of trans women that I've met actually have very similar experiences when it comes to negative experiences, trauma experience. But I think having to push or consistently tell people who you are, I think forces a maturity in you. And I think you become quite aware even of your surroundings. Like, I remember during my transition, I'd walk into a room and I'd know how to get out of it straight away, you know? And you become extremely aware of yourself. You have a great insight into your life, and you have this maturity and this understanding of what life is supposed to be. And it's not as difficult as people make it out to be. It's actually quite straightforward when you think of it. So I think people that are neurodiverse or people from the LGBTQ community tend to be an awful lot mature. An awful lot more mature, 100%, I think, because we have an insight that a lot of people wouldn't have.
Well, we definitely have a set of experiences that makes us have to consider a whole host of things that cis straight people don't have to. That's a reality for sure. You know, when you grow up in an environment, like you said, if you go to an event or something, that the first thing you do is clock where all the exits are because you're managing your safety. Of course, that increases your maturity levels. Life now, Paige, you said that it's a year and a bit post surgery. You're living life, presumably enjoying life. What's the reality of life for you now?
So I'll be very honest. I don't think I've spoken kind of openly about this, but it is a double-edged sword. I think when it comes to your freedom in yourself, I've never been more free. I do not need anything from anybody, really. Obviously you do. What I'm saying is I don't need validation, which is great. But it is a double-edged sword because I did stupidly think as well that having gender reassignment surgery, that's the end of it. There's no transphobia. There's no having to explain yourself to somebody. I kind of thought that wasn't going to be the case after my surgery. But it is quite similar being post-op, dating and meeting people than it is being pre-op. Like my job, for instance, I never have to disclose in my job about my transition at all. But I chose to. I think for fear of me being in the media a good bit, that it was just going to be found out anyway. And a lot of patients that I do see have brought it up without me even thinking that they knew, that kind of way. But even from a dating point of view, I think no matter what, whether you're pre-op or post-op, I find cisgender straight men to still look at you regardless of whether you are pre-op or post-op. I think you can show a man how charismatic, strong, funny, important, amazing you are as a person. But once you tell them you're trans, everything else goes out the window and that's all they hear. But at the same time, it doesn't really bother me much anymore. Yeah.
Do you think that there's still a lot of stigma then? What I'm kind of picking up and inferring from what you've said there is that when you tell them you're trans, it doesn't go well after that.
Not that it doesn't go well, but I think trans women are notoriously fetishized. And I find that, I'll be honest, I did get a lot of messages when I was pre-op and I don't anymore being post-op. So that kind of tells you, that kind of sorts the men from the boys, I think. And it makes you understand who was fetishizing you and who wasn't. I think I'm still mulling post-op dating. Like now.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably accurate. What you've just said there is you can't finish it because it's well, this is ongoing. This is part of life for you. You're still navigating it. It's not like you transition and then it's over. That's what I'm hearing you say is that actually this is still part of life and you're still trying to figure out how do I navigate this and keep myself safe.
But it is great as well because worries that I did have as a pre-op trans woman are not there now. As in, worries about, I think, even down to being clocked in public and stuff like that. Those worries aren't there being opposed. So I'm learning to relax a little bit more when it comes to meeting new people. And I think that's a lot of my issue as well. I think I need to learn to just be a little bit more kind of relaxed and comfortable.
And Paige, have you publicly been on the receiving end of transphobia? I've kind of inadvertently picked up that you have online, or maybe earlier in those 12 years from the community and from people you knew growing up. Have you experienced it just being out, let's say in Dublin or whatever, just walking down the street randomly, people spot you and come after you, say things? Is that a reality for you?
Not necessarily. Years ago, yes. At the beginning of my transition, yes, but not so much in the last 5 or 6 years. I think as a young adult, years ago, I tended to push the boat out an awful lot and I would go out and meet people and probably not disclose the fact that I was trans, and you would face public backlash there. I was attacked a couple of years ago by a guy in the city that had just started talking to me, and in order for me to get him away from me, I told him I was trans and he attacked me. So you still have to be very, very careful. With regards to the online thing, I think that everybody is going to have something to say. There's always going to be one person that has an opinion. And I think with regards to me being in hospital when I came home from Germany after my surgery, a lot of people had an awful lot to say, and I had a lot of threats online a lot of people threatening to come and slit my throat, and it was quite grim. But I think social media, it can be a cesspit. It really can.
Do I even ask this question? Because of course it has an impact on you. Like, it has to be upsetting. How do you manage that?
I don't think it upsets me. I think it drives me a little bit. I think when I get a comment like that, see, the difference between me and somebody that would have hate towards me is that I go to sleep every night, John, and I know exactly who I am as a person. And people like that do not know who they are as people. So I wouldn't even waste my breath a lot of the time retaliating with somebody that doesn't even know who they are, because how are they ever meant to conceptualize my retaliation if they fundamentally do not understand themselves? So I think the one to be pitied in that situation is them, realistically.
First of all, I really like what you've said there, because I think there's something about that is really important to zoom in on. Someone could say that, right, as a kind of like a defense. I'm going to be strong. I'm going to armor up. I'm going to be like, none of you fuckers are going to get me.
Yeah.
Right. But when you said it, that's not what you were giving off. It was like, I'm at peace with myself. And if you want to throw shit in my direction, like, be my guest, but it's not gonna.
I genuinely don't care.
And that's a beautiful thing to see.
Couldn't care less. Like, honestly, I will still wake up in the morning and brush my teeth and go about my day. Like, honestly. Like, and somebody really, really tried to get to me there a little while ago and said, and this comment, and you might have heard this comment before. I think it's been thrown around a couple of times, I think, in a couple of derogatory ways. But somebody said that when I die and they dig my bones up in 100 years' time, they're going to show the bones of a man. And I think that just goes to show the misunderstanding of sex, you know? It's just the uneducation and the closed-mindedness can be actually staggering at times. So I will live my life the way I see fit. I suggest you do the same, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. Amen. I kind of just want to reply to something you said there about the misunderstanding. So I grew up a cisgendered boy, became a young man, did training that led me to, I kind of accidentally end up working with the trans community. And if I'm perfectly honest, the first time I ever thought about my gender was when I met my first trans client. Because, you know, for me, it was like not something I had ever really had to consider. I don't know why. My sexuality had been, but I never really thought about being a man. And after I met my first trans client, I thought for days and weeks about how problematic it was that I had never thought about the fact that I was a man, or examined what that meant, or gender roles, or how I had learned to be a man from my dad. And, you know, all of these things started flooding in. And I actually had an experience, which I've shared openly before, for a period later on that year where I thought I might be non-binary, because I began to examine pronouns and thought, I really actually don't enjoy being identified as a man. Like, when somebody says he or him, it never really feels right. And I prefer if people use John in all sentences. And then I kind of went around it, and I actually realized that my dislike of being a man is because men are often responsible for most of the shit, horrible things that people do in the world. And I kind of wanted to distance myself. So then I did like a U-turn again, and I thought, well, no, actually, I want to be a good man. I'm going to embrace being a man, but I want to be a fucking decent one who does good things in the world. And that was a whole process that took about 2 years of me examining my own gender. And what I was left with, Paige, was that, like, people don't know fucking anything about gender.
Not a clue.
Nothing. Like, just even the fact that it's a construct, it's like people are like, oh yeah, but it's sex assigned at birth. And I'm like, yeah, but sex assigned at birth and gender are two different things. Like, how do you not know that?
No, the amount of people that I know, the amount of cis straight people that I would know that think gender and sexuality are the same thing. I think that being trans is the equivalent to being like a crossdresser or a drag queen. I can't cope.
Yes. And that's one of the things that I really want to highlight, is that actually gender identity is for everybody, not just trans people and intersex people. It's for everyone.
Yeah.
Like, we all need to examine our gender identity and think about it and deconstruct it, because so much gets projected onto men and women in this binary that like it's really useful to pick it apart. And I do feel, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I do feel that we're like on a big shift in regards to that. Like I look at the younger generation now who are like teens and early 20s, and I often think, oh, people are actually really talking about gender and sexuality now much more openly in a way that they weren't when I was a kid.
It definitely is being talked about a little bit more, but I think there should be a shift and a change hand in hand with that. And I find that the curve has become a lot slower. You know, I think change has taken an awful long time, but I feel like it's starting to plateau now a little bit. Like even with regards to trans healthcare, like I'm not sure whether you were following when I had my surgery over in Germany and I came home. And I was referred to Germany by the HSE for surgery. Yes. And when I came home, not one doctor in a specific hospital was able to treat me and left me to go almost septic. So I think with regards to, I took them to court. I wanted an apology. I wanted some sort of change for trans healthcare. And still to this day, since the court case, they haven't engaged with the Transgender Equality Network with TENI, but the way that they have said that they would. But I also feel like the shift in any sort of change with regards to anything is very slow. It's very slow.
Yeah. I mean, people's attitudes might change in the public arena, but when it comes to the systems and the infrastructure and public services, it's like snail pace. So, Paige, if we're like going to begin kind of wrapping it up based off like all the kind of tangential areas we went to, what would be your parting sentiment? Like if you wanted to wrap things up or say something to end, where would you go?
What I would like to say is when it boils down to it, nobody else can make you happy but yourself. And I genuinely do think that the most important basic is to be happy and comfortable in yourself. And I think that there's always help. There's always help. And like, I know you would be the first person to help anybody if they needed anything with regards to anything, but especially with therapy or help or advice. And I would be kind of the same, but I think life is too short to not live it how you want to live it. And as the quote behind you says, love yourself today.
Yes. Okay. Do you have a question for the next guest?
Oh, that's a tough one. My question would be, how would you feel if your partner decided that they wanted to transition?
Oh, very interesting question. Really thought-provoking, that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Paige. So good to have you on. Thank you for sharing so openly.
Anytime. I really enjoy myself.
Thank you for listening. I'm curious about what this conversation has stimulated for you. Thoughts, feelings, curiosity. If this episode intrigued you, hit follow to be notified about new episodes. I know these conversations are valuable to me, and if you think they're valuable too, please do leave a review. Leaving a review allows more people to discover the podcast. You can scroll down to ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and click write a review. You can also connect with Becoming You on Instagram and TikTok by searching the handle at becoming_you__. The links are in the show notes too. You can also visit www.becomingyou.ie to explore the idea of becoming yourself. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.